Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know where are you watching from and what time is it there. Please hype me on YouTube. Thanks. I never thought I'd end up backtracking to my mother's house at 26, with my kid sister in tow and my whole life packed into the trunk of a beat-up sedan. Yet that was exactly where I found myself in October of 2011, driving east on I-40 with swollen eyes, a gnawing headache, and nothing but failure trailing behind me. A week earlier, I had been engaged, planning a wedding, convinced I was building a future. Then everything unraveled in a blur of shouting, betrayal, and the kind of heartbreak that leaves you sick in your stomach. My fiancé had been cheating, and worse, he hadn't even cared when I found out. The engagement ring I had once admired under the California sun now sat at the bottom of my purse, heavy as a stone. Clara was the only one who didn't say, "I told you so." She was 19, restless, and a little reckless, but she had stood beside me when I felt like I was falling apart. She didn't even hesitate when I told her I was leaving Los Angeles. She threw her bag into the car and said, "Then I'm coming with you." We had been driving for hours, the desert stretching endlessly on either side. My hands clutched the wheel as if the road itself might disappear. Clara kept her earbuds in, scrolling her phone, barely speaking until the city lights of Flagstaff appeared like a small miracle. By then, it was close to midnight, and exhaustion weighed on me like lead. When the neon sign of the Blue Horizon Motel buzzed into view, half the letters dark, it felt like the best option we had. I pulled in with a sigh. The lot was nearly empty, the cracked asphalt scattered with broken bottles and cigarette butts. Something about the place made my skin crawl, but I told myself it was just fatigue. Clara gave me a doubtful look but didn't argue when I said, "It's just one night. We'll be gone by morning." Inside, the manager barely spoke. He pushed the key toward me with trembling hands, his eyes avoiding mine. His wrist was wrapped in a fresh bandage, and I remember wondering if he'd hurt himself at work. The whole exchange lasted less than a minute, yet it set a tone I couldn't shake. Room 12 smelled of bleach and dampness, the kind of odor that clings to your clothes. The sheets didn't match, one lamp buzzed on and off, and the carpet was sticky in places. Clara groaned, "This place gives me the creeps," and flopped onto the bed. I tried to laugh it off. "Better than the car," I said, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true. We showered, changed, and killed the lights. For a few minutes, the silence of the desert wrapped around us, and I almost convinced myself we'd get some rest. But somewhere deep down, I already knew this night wouldn't be ordinary. Something was waiting for us in that room, and I could feel it even before I closed my eyes. I woke to Clara whispering my name. "Evie, do you hear that?" At first I thought it was just the plumbing, the old pipes groaning like they do in cheap motels. But then I sat up and listened. What I heard wasn't pipes, it was voices. They drifted through the vent above the bed, faint but sharp enough to catch. A woman's voice, cracking with fear, another, deeper, angry. And then, something else. Softer, like a child repeating words I couldn't make out. Clara clutched her blanket, wide-eyed. "Call the front desk." "Someone's fighting," she whispered. "Maybe we should—" I shook my head. My gut told me it wasn't a simple argument. The woman's tone wasn't just angry, it was desperate. Begging. The man's responses were muffled, growling. And the child, that whisper sent chills down my spine. I forced myself out of bed, pretending to be brave. "Thin walls," I told her, though my voice lacked conviction. I pressed my ear closer to the vent, and that's when the voices stopped. Mid-sentence. Silence, thick and unnatural, swallowed the room. Clara stared at me, trembling. "Evie, let's just go. Please." "We can't," I said, though I wanted to, anywhere else. "It's the middle of the night. We don't have the money for." I backed away from the vent, and that's when I saw it. Scratched into the wooden nightstand, faint but clear under the flickering lamp. "Do not listen to them. They know you are here." My breath caught in my throat. someone else had been in this room before us, someone who heard what we were hearing. Clara whispered, "What if it's that creep from the gas station? What if he followed us?" I wanted to reassure her, but I couldn't. Instead, I turned on every light in the room, pulled the chair against the door, and sat awake, listening. The voices didn't return, but the silence felt heavier than before, like the motel itself was holding its breath. We didn't sleep. We sat there until the first gray light of morning slipped through the thin curtains, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Nothing except the weight of fear settling deeper into us both. By sunrise, I wanted nothing more than to get out. Clara was pale, her hands shaking as she stuffed clothes into her backpack. Neither of us spoke until we stepped into the lobby. That's when I saw it. The missing persons poster taped near the front desk. A woman and a little boy, smiling in the photograph. Date missing, October 9th, 2010, 1 year earlier. Same day, same motel. I froze. Clara followed my gaze, her lips parting as she read the words. Before either of us could speak, the manager looked up. His watery eyes met mine for the first time, and he gave me the faintest, knowing smile. It was the kind of smile that didn't belong in a place like this. A smile that said he knew exactly what we'd heard. I grabbed Clara's hand, muttered a thank you, and pushed her toward the car. We didn't breathe until we were back on the highway, the blue horizon fading behind us. The farther we drove, the harder it became to convince myself it had been imagination. The voices were too vivid, too layered, and that warning carved into the nightstand. It wasn't just random graffiti. It was a message, left for whoever came after. Clara was quiet most of the day, staring out the window. Finally, she said, "Woman and her son? That's who we heard?" Do you think that I didn't want to believe it, but the possibility clung to me. The desperation in the woman's cries, the softness of the child's whispers, it lined up too perfectly. That night, as we checked into a cleaner, brighter motel, I made Clara sleep with the TV on. The hum of voices and laughter from the sitcom reruns was a comfort. Silence felt dangerous now. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece it together. Had the manager been involved? Had he seen something? Or was he just another witness who chose to look away? His smile haunted me almost as much as the voices did. We made it to our mother's house the next evening. She hugged us both, though her eyes lingered on me with a mix of relief and disappointment. I didn't tell her what happened at the blue horizon. I didn't think she'd believe me. But I've never forgotten that night. I never forgot the scratch in the nightstand, the sudden silence, the faces on that missing persons poster. Every October, when the air turns cold and the days shorten, I think of that motel. I think of the voices trapped in its walls, calling out for someone to hear them. And I wonder how many other travelers checked into room 12, heard the same thing, and left in silence. Some places carry the weight of what happened within their walls. You can dismiss them as creaks, pipes, or bad dreams, but deep down, you know the truth. Fear is not always a warning to run. It can be a reminder to listen. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Trust your instincts. Don't ignore the signs, because not everyone gets the chance to leave. I never liked grocery shopping after dark. Something about the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the half-empty parking lots, and the strange stillness of big box stores at night always put me on edge. But nursing doesn't come with predictable hours, and by the time I got off my Wednesday shift at St. Mary's, it was already past 8. I was bone-tired, still in my scrubs, hair knotted into a bun that had lost its battle with gravity hours ago. All I wanted was a hot shower and sleep. But marriage, as I'd come to learn in just 7 months, had its own demands. Ethan had been on my case for weeks about not cooking, about how I chose the hospital over him. He wasn't wrong that I'd been absent. 12-hour shifts swallow you whole. By the time I walked through our door, I barely had energy to microwave leftovers, let alone chop onions and stir sauces. Still, I hated the guilt trips, the digs about how marriage wasn't supposed to feel like living with a roommate. So I stopped at Target. It was January in Phoenix, colder than usual, and the lot was quiet. A couple of cars sat abandoned on the far side, one with a flat tire, another dusted in what looked like months of grime. The neon Target sign buzzed faintly, and I remember thinking the store looked tired, almost haunted. Inside, the greeter gave me a nod without a word. The place was too empty, the soundtrack of corporate pop echoing faintly off the polished floors. I grabbed a basket and made my way toward frozen foods, telling myself I'd grab some pizzas, a few microwave meals, maybe something I could toss into a skillet and call it dinner. The hum of the freezers drowned out everything else. I've stood in ICUs where machines beeped nonstop, but that sound, low, steady, electric, felt heavier somehow. I opened the glass door, frost biting my hand, and reached for a pizza when I noticed her. In the reflection, 2 doors down, stood a woman. Old-fashioned gray coat, straight posture, face pale and unreadable. She wasn't shopping. She wasn't moving. She was staring at me. I snapped my head around. The aisle was empty. Only a cart sat nearby, half filled with random things. A box of cereal, 2 jars of pickles, and 3 identical frozen turkeys stacked like bricks. I frowned, glancing back at the freezer door. The reflection had already shifted to just me, my tired eyes, my messy bun. I laughed under my breath. "Get it together, Melissa. You're just tired." But the cart, it bothered me. I tried to shake it off. I had seen strange things before, especially after long shifts. Nurses joke about hallucinating call lights, swearing we see a patient's room lit up when it isn't. Fatigue does that. I told myself this was no different. I tossed 2 frozen meals into my basket and moved on. My sneakers squeaked faintly on the floor, but underneath that sound came another. The deliberate click, click, click of heels. Not rushed, not casual. Measured, steady. I stopped, pretending to study the frozen vegetables. The clicking stopped too. The silence stretched, then a soft voice whispered, "Excuse me." I spun around so fast my basket nearly slipped from my hand. Nothing. No one. My heart thumped against my ribs. I forced myself to breathe, to laugh it off. Maybe it was a customer in the next aisle. Maybe sound carried weird and empty spaces. Still, goosebumps rose on my arms. I pushed forward, but when I reached the other end of the aisle, my stomach dropped. That same cart, the one with the cereal, the pickles, and the turkeys, was waiting for me, placed perfectly across my path. The jars rattled, faintly, as if the cart had just been pushed. I looked around, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hello?" No answer. I backed up, gripping the basket tighter, when the freezer door beside me caught my eye. In its reflection stood the woman again, closer this time. That same pale gray coat, face drawn, eyes dark like empty sockets. I gasped and whipped around. Nothing but rows of frozen peas and waffles. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me. Ethan's name lit up the screen. "Why are you taking so long?" His voice snapped as soon as I answered. "Store? Or are you lying again? Are you even at the?" I stared at the freezer door, my reflection pale, shaking. "Not now, Ethan," I whispered, then hung up. But when I glanced back at the glass, my reflection was smiling. Wide, crooked, and I wasn't. The basket slipped from my hand, frozen pizzas and plastic trays skidding across the linoleum. My knees felt weak, and I bent quickly to grab the items, desperate for something normal to focus on. But when I lifted my head, I saw her again, in the reflection, standing directly behind me, her hand stretched toward my shoulder. I spun, hard in my throat. The aisle was empty. My breaths came shallow and fast. I shoved the groceries back into the basket, fingers shaking. This wasn't fatigue. This wasn't stress. Something was here with me. I bolted toward the end of the aisle, nearly colliding with a young employee restocking sodas. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, eyes wide. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice tight. I didn't slow down. I made for the self-checkout, tossing my groceries onto the scanner like they were on fire. The machine beeped cheerfully, oblivious to the dread clawing at me. My eyes darted to the black and white monitor above, the one showing customers at each register. My stomach flipped. On the screen, I wasn't alone. The woman in the gray coat stood inches behind me, her face close enough to breathe down my neck. I screamed, dropping everything. People turned, startled. A mother covered her kid's ears. But when I looked up again, she was gone. I fled the store without my groceries, without looking back. And I swear on everything, that as the automatic doors closed behind me, I heard her voice one last time whispering right at my ear, "Don't leave me here." By the time I reached my car, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. The night air was sharp, colder than it had any right to be in Phoenix. My breath fogged the windshield as I sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring at the automatic doors of Target. People walked in and out casually, mothers with carts, teenagers with snacks, an older man in a baseball cap. None of them looked haunted. None of them screamed. And yet I felt like I had just run out of a burning building, lungs full of smoke. I turned the key and peeled out of the lot, headlights bouncing off the cracked asphalt. Halfway home, my phone buzzed again. Ethan. I didn't want to answer, but my hands moved on their own. "Where are you now?" he snapped before I could speak. "Driving home," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't buy anything?" I hesitated, trying to steady my breath. "When I get home." "Something happened. At the store. I'll tell you." He sighed, long and annoyed. "You don't want to cook? Just say it." "Melissa, I'm tired of excuses. You always have some story." If his words stung more than I wanted to admit. I wanted to yell, to tell him I had just seen something I couldn't explain, but I didn't have the strength. Instead, I drove the rest of the way in silence, knuckles white against the wheel. When I walked into our apartment, the place smelled faintly of beer and leftover pizza. Ethan sat on the couch, scrolling his phone. He barely looked up. "You're pale," he muttered. "Night shifts." "You sure you weren't just imagining things? You work too many, I know what I saw," I said, sharper than I meant to. He laughed. "So what? Some ghost in the freezer aisle? Do you hear yourself?" I wanted to argue, but the truth was, I did sound crazy. And yet, even as I kicked off my shoes and sank onto the couch, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, like she had followed me home. Later that night, I went to grab ice from the freezer. The door creaked open, the light flickering. And there, faintly, in the chrome reflection of the ice tray, I saw her again. Pale face, dark eyes, watching. I slammed the door shut, my heart in my throat. This wasn't over. Days turned into weeks, but the feeling never left me. Every time I opened the freezer at home, I half expected her face to be waiting. Sometimes I thought I saw the faint outline of her coat in the reflection. Other times I swore I heard that soft, whispered voice. "Don't leave me here." Ethan grew more impatient. He told me to stop acting crazy, that maybe I should take fewer shifts or see someone. But what I couldn't tell him, what I didn't even want to admit to myself, was that this wasn't stress. Stress doesn't follow you home. Stress doesn't smile at you through your own reflection. One night, after another long shift, I sat alone at our kitchen table. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room. I stared at the freezer door, my own reflection faint in the white surface, and I asked out loud, "Who are you?" Silence. Just the buzz of the fridge motor. Then, faintly, almost like a sigh, "I was left here." I froze, skin crawling. I wanted to run, but something in her voice. It wasn't anger. It wasn't malice. It was sorrow. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that cart, the jars of pickles, the 3 frozen turkeys, about how she appeared only in reflections, about the emptiness in her eyes. I'll never know her story. Maybe no one will. But I can't shake the thought that some people die in lonely places, aisles of grocery stores, parking lots, motels, and they stay there desperate not to be forgotten. I don't shop alone at night anymore, and whenever I pass the freezer aisle in a store, I keep my eyes down. But even now, years later, when I open my freezer at home, I sometimes catch her waiting. Not always, just enough to remind me. She's still there. Not all ghosts are made of malice. Some are born of loneliness, of lives cut short in places no one remembers. But the living, people like me, have a responsibility too. We can't dismiss our fears, can't drown them in work or pretend they're in our heads just because others don't believe us. What I learned that winter night is simple. Listen to yourself, trust your instincts, and never assume the quiet, ordinary places in life are as safe as they seem. I was 27 years old in the winter of 2011, still convinced the world owed me adventure. I'd been running a travel blog for about a year, calling it Restless Roads, and I thought I was onto something unique. Most travel blogs showed beaches, trendy cafes, and bucket list destinations. Mine was different. I wanted to write about the weird, the uncomfortable, the bad experiences that most people would avoid. My audience wasn't huge, but it was growing, and I thrived on the comments that said, "Man, you're crazy for doing this, but I love reading it." That kind of attention can make you reckless. I lived in Portland then, in a studio apartment that smelled faintly of curry from the neighbors' cooking and mold from the bathroom I could never quite keep dry. My day job was editing copy for a small marketing firm, boring work that paid the bills. But at night, I would scroll through maps and forums, planning trips I couldn't really afford. When my tax refund came in, I decided to blow it on a new series for the blog. I wanted to call it 1-Star Stays. The idea was simple. Pick some of the lowest-rated motels in America, stay a night in each, and write about it with humor and photos. Friends told me it was stupid. My best friend Ryan said, "Ethan, you're gonna get robbed, or worse. People write those reviews for a reason." But I brushed it off. "That's the point," I told him. "I'll suffer so readers don't have to." At 27, I thought being reckless was the same thing as being brave. That's how I ended up booking a night at the Desert Inn Lodge in Gallup, New Mexico. The place had a 1.3-star average on the review site. People wrote horror stories about cockroaches, drug dealers in the parking lot, and police visits. It sounded perfect for my series. Cheap too, $32 for a single. I booked it with a grin, already imagining the funny captions I'd write. I pulled in around 10:15 on a Tuesday night. The neon sign outside barely worked, only half the letters glowing, so it read, "Day in Low." The lot was littered with broken bottles and trash, and 2 cars sat on flat tires like they'd been abandoned for years. The office was dim, smelling of stale smoke and burnt coffee. The desk clerk barely looked up when I came in. His hair was greasy, hanging over his forehead, and he had the kind of pale skin that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in months. A TV behind him played static. When I asked if the place had Wi-Fi, he smirked. "You're lucky if the lights stay on." He slid a rusted key across the counter without another word. I carried my bag to room 19, and the second I opened the door, I realized this might not be funny at all. The carpet was stained, the sheets yellowed, and the air smelled like mold. The bathroom door didn't close, and the lamp on the nightstand was burned out. Worse, the window lock was broken, the thin curtain flapping with the desert wind. On the floor near the nightstand was a used syringe. I took a picture for the blog, but my hand wasn't steady. I set my bag down, turned on my camera, and told myself it was just part of the experience. But the truth was already gnawing at me. This didn't feel like a joke anymore. I tried to keep the spirit of the project alive by taking notes, snapping pictures of the broken furniture, and even recording a short video of myself joking about the stains. but the more I looked around, the harder it was to force a smile. The room didn't feel just dirty. It felt unsafe. Around 11, I heard raised voices outside. I pulled the curtain back an inch and saw two men by a beat-up pickup truck. They were arguing, one shoving a wad of cash into the other's hand. Then I saw a small package change hands. My stomach tightened. One of the men glanced up and caught me watching. Our eyes met through the gap in the curtain. I ducked back, heart hammering, whispering, "It's just part of the experience." I sat at the desk, typing nervously into my laptop, but my ears stayed sharp to every sound. At 11:40, a woman screamed somewhere down the hallway, "Leave me alone." Then silence. I froze with my hands over the keys, listening, waiting. The silence stretched until I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. A few minutes later, something slammed into my door. Hard. The dresser rattled. My whole body jolted. Heavy footsteps moved down the hallway and a low voice muttered, "Wrong room." I sat there shaking, barely able to breathe. The humor I thought I'd find in this place was gone. All that was left was fear. I thought about packing my stuff and leaving, but outside, engines kept revving. Cars pulled in and out, headlights slicing through the thin curtain, music blasting from stereos. It felt like the motel was alive with movement, most of it dangerous. Every time a car door slammed, I flinched. At 12:10, I heard it, a sharp crack, unmistakable. Gunfire. My instincts told me to hit the floor, and I did, pressing my cheek against the dirty carpet. Shouts rang out, people running, another crack splitting the night. Through the bottom edge of the curtain, I saw a man collapse by the vending machine. My camera sat on the bed, but I couldn't bring myself to grab it. For the first time in my life, I understood that this wasn't content. This was survival. I lay there, frozen, until the sound of sirens cut through the chaos. Red and blue lights filled the lot, flashing across the thin walls. Police shouted commands, guns drawn. I crawled to the window and peeked out. Officers were dragging men from rooms, cuffing them, pressing them against cars. The clerk was shoved out of the office in handcuffs. Paramedics knelt over the body by the vending machine, but he wasn't moving. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. When the chaos finally died down, the lot looked like a war zone. Police tape fluttered in the cold wind. Officers stood in small clusters talking into radios, and the body by the vending machine was covered with a sheet. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. They wouldn't stop shaking. A knock at my door made me jump. I opened it slowly to find a uniformed officer standing there, flashlight in hand. "Evening, sir. We're checking the rooms. You a guest here tonight?" "Yeah," I croaked, my voice rough. "Room 19. He nodded and asked for my ID. I handed it over with trembling fingers. "Anything tonight?" he asked. "You hear or see?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep my head down and get the hell out. But another part, the part that started this blog, the part that thought chasing stories made me brave, spoke up. "I saw a deal going down in the parking lot around 11. Two guys, one driving a pickup, and I heard a woman scream down the hall. The officer scribbled notes, asked a few more questions, and gave me back my license. May need a statement later. Don't leave town without checking in, all right?" The words sank into me. Don't leave town. This was supposed to be one night, one stupid blog post. Now it felt like I'd stepped into something I couldn't walk away from. When the officer left, I sat at the desk, staring at my laptop screen. The blog page I'd been drafting was still open. A half-written caption read, "You think your motel is bad? At least you didn't find a syringe by the bed." I closed the lid. The whole thing felt grotesque now. At 3 in the morning, I finally left the room, stepping carefully over the glass shards near the stairwell. The lot smelled like exhaust and smoke, and the flashing lights had faded to just a few parked cruisers. I climbed into my car and drove to a Walmart parking lot a couple miles away. The relief of locking my own doors and knowing no one was a wall away from me was overwhelming. I reclined the seat and closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Every slam of a cart or distant car door jolted me awake again. By sunrise, I knew I couldn't just pretend this was another travel story. Something in me had shifted. I wasn't just a blogger chasing laughs. I was a guy who'd almost gotten pulled into something violent, maybe fatal, because I treated danger like it was entertainment. I sipped stale coffee from a gas station cup, staring at my reflection in the convenience store window. My eyes were bloodshot, face pale. I looked less like an adventurer and more like someone who'd just barely dodged becoming a headline. For the first time, I started asking myself hard questions. What was I really chasing? Views? Attention? A sense of being different? Was it worth the knot of fear still twisting in my chest? I didn't have answers, not yet. But I knew I couldn't keep going the way I had been. That afternoon I drove back to the motel, not because I wanted to, but because the police asked me to stop by and give a formal statement. I parked on the edge of the lot, watching as workers strung more yellow tape across the stairwell. The neon sign buzzed faintly overhead, still flickering day and low. Inside the office, the same clerk who'd smirked at me the night before was gone. A different officer sat at the desk taking notes. He waved me over and introduced himself as Detective Harris. "We just want to get your version of things on record. Take your time." So I told him about the men in the parking lot, the cash, the package, the scream in the hallway, and the thud against my door. I left out the part where I was there for a blog, at least at first. But Harris was sharp. "What brought you to this place anyway? Business? Passing through?" I swallowed hard. In America. I run a small travel blog. I was doing a piece on, well, the worst motels. His eyebrow lifted just slightly. "Son, that's one hell of a way to gamble with your life." I couldn't argue. After an hour, they thanked me and told me I was free to go. But the word stuck. Gamble with your life. Driving away, I realized that was exactly what I'd been doing. Not just that night, but maybe the whole time I'd been chasing cheap thrills and calling it adventure. I checked into a chain motel on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but clean, with working locks and fluorescent lighting in the parking lot. The first thing I did after locking the door was call Ryan. "Dude, are you okay?" he asked after I told him what happened. "A shooting in Gallup last night." "That was the place?" "I saw something online about..." "Yeah," I said quietly. "It was the place." There was a pause. Then he said, "Wants to read your obituary." "Ethan, you need to stop this crap. It's not worth it." "Nobody..." His words hit me harder than I expected. I stared at the clean motel sheets, at the coffee maker humming in the corner, and realized how much I'd taken normal safety for granted. That night I wrote. Not jokes, not snarky captions, just the truth. I wrote about the fear, about lying on the dirty carpet with gunshots outside my door, about realizing I wasn't invincible. The words poured out of me, raw and unpolished, but real. When I finally clicked publish, I didn't feel clever. I didn't feel adventurous. I just felt honest. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. The blog post went live around midnight. I didn't expect much. Honestly, I thought maybe a handful of regular readers would skim it, then move on to funnier content somewhere else. But by morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages filled my inbox. Some were from strangers. "Man, I've stayed at that place. I left after 10 minutes. Others were sobering. "My brother didn't make it out of a motel like that alive. Thank you for telling the truth." The post was being shared far more than anything else I'd ever written. Not because it was witty or edgy, but because it was raw. People connected with the fear, with the honesty of realizing too late that a stunt could have ended in tragedy. I sat at the edge of the motel bed, still processing the night before when my phone rang. It was my mom. She never called this early. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "News this morning," I thought. She couldn't finish. "Please stop doing these crazy things." When I saw the hearing, the crack in her voice broke something in me. All those times I brushed off her worry, All the times I told friends it was no big deal. Now I heard her fear, plain as day, and it cut deeper than any criticism online ever could. "I'm done, Mom," I said. And for the first time I meant it. The next couple of days passed in a blur. I gave a follow-up statement to the police, then packed my car and headed west toward Arizona, skipping the list of motels I'd planned to hit. Instead of chasing ratings, I stopped at quiet roadside diners, talked to truckers, wrote about landscapes and history. It felt different, slower, maybe less exciting, but I felt safe. And that mattered more than the clicks. One evening, parked at a rest stop near Flagstaff, I pulled out my camera, not to catch something shocking or gross, but just to photograph the sunset painting the desert in orange and violet. For once, I wasn't performing for strangers online. I was just living. I thought about that night in Gallup often, about the woman's scream, the thud at my door, the body by the vending machine. It replayed in my head, but instead of fueling my blog, it fueled a change in me. I realized I'd been treating danger like a theme park ride, something you could step into for fun, then walk away from. But danger doesn't work that way. It's real, and it doesn't care if you're looking for a story. That lesson stayed with me. Even now, years later, I can't drive past a rundown motel without a chill crawling up my spine. I know some stories aren't meant to be laughed at or packaged as entertainment. Some stories are warnings, and I was lucky enough to live through mine to tell it. Chasing danger for attention might seem thrilling, but life isn't a stage play where you can always walk away. Real risks carry real consequences, not just for you, but for the people who care about you. The lesson I learned in that dim Gallup motel was simple. Your life is worth more than likes, clicks, or stories. Some places and some choices aren't worth the gamble. My name is Michael Lawson, and by the spring of 2003 I was 62 years old. A retired detective who had seen just about every kind of cruelty a man could see in New Orleans. I'd carried a badge for 35 years, and when I finally turned in my gun, it was because my body had given out before my mind. The doctors told me my knees looked like old gravel roads after decades of climbing stairs, chasing suspects, and hauling myself in and out of crime scenes. The left knee finally gave out during a hurricane evacuation drill in '02, and by January of the next year, I was in a hospital bed with a titanium joint hammered in place. Retirement wasn't something I looked forward to. My wife, Nancy, had passed away 3 years earlier after a long fight with ovarian cancer. She'd been my anchor, and when she was gone, I found myself drifting in a city that felt emptier without her laughter echoing off our kitchen walls. Our daughter, Caroline, lived in Lufkin, Texas, with her husband and 2 little boys. She begged me to move closer after the surgery, at least for a while. "Dad, it'll be easier for me to check in on you," she said. I didn't want to be a burden, so I agreed to stay in a cheap extended stay motel while I did my therapy sessions. That's how I ended up at the Desert Rose Motor Lodge off Highway 59. The place had once been painted pink, but now the stucco had faded to a shade closer to dried salmon. The pool was drained and filled with weeds, the vending machines swallowed quarters without so much as a buzz, and the neon sign out front sputtered like it was dying every night. Still, it was only $30 a night with a weekly rate, and the room came with a bed, a table, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of bleach. That was all I needed. My days were a pattern. Morning exercises with a rubber band and small weights, a drive to the physical therapy center where some kid barely out of college stretched and bent my leg until I wanted to curse, then back to my room to ice the knee. In the evenings, I read old crime novels or wrote long notes in a leather journal, trying to keep my mind sharp. But at night, when the quiet settled in and I couldn't hear anything but the buzz of the motel light outside, the loneliness sank heavy. The manager was a man named Pete. He had a long, pale face and always greeted me with the same toothy grin that felt rehearsed. "How's that knee, Mr. Lawson? Need extra towels?" He was friendly enough, but something about the way his eyes darted when he asked questions didn't sit right with me. Old habits die hard, and I'd spent too long reading faces to ignore my instincts. By the third night, I started hearing noises through the thin wall between my room and 237. At first it was just muffled conversations in Spanish, nothing out of the ordinary. But then came the crying. A woman's soft sobs, followed by a man's harsh whisper, commanding her to be quiet. Once, around 1 a.m, I heard the door slam and heavy footsteps running down the exterior hallway. My detective instincts stirred awake, and I knew this wasn't just thin walls and restless guests. Something was off. I tried to ignore it at first. After all, it wasn't my job anymore. I told myself I was a patient in recovery, a retired man with no badge, no gun, and no business snooping around. But that part of me, the part that had followed hunches into dark alleys and staked out crumbling houses for days at a time, didn't just shut off. The next morning I saw Rosa, the housekeeper, pushing her cart along the walkway. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, with tired eyes and a smile that looked forced. I nodded to her and asked casually, "Busy week for you?" She gave a polite laugh, but when I asked about the folks in 237, her shoulders stiffened. "They pay cash," she said quickly, looking down at her mop bucket. Moved along before I could ask anything else. "Always cash." Then later that day I noticed a different car parked outside 237. An old white van with tinted windows, the kind I'd seen 1,000 times in narcotic stings. 2 men unloaded boxes, keeping their heads low. That evening, I went out pretending to smoke, though I hadn't touched a cigarette since the mid-'80s. That's when I saw her, a teenage girl, maybe 15, stepping out of the room to get ice. She looked terrified. Before I could say a word, a man yanked her back inside by the arm. That night I sat at the small table in my room and thought about Nancy. She had always been the one to remind me that justice wasn't just a job, it was a duty. She used to say, "Mike, some people were made to look away, but you weren't built that way." I took out my old camcorder, a relic from the 90s, and started recording from the window. Grainy footage, but it caught what I needed. Different cars arriving, men coming and going. Rosa delivering towels to a room that never asked for them. One evening near the laundry room, I overheard Rosa pleading with Pete. "This," she said, her voice breaking. "They scare me." Pete's voice dropped low, sharp. "I can't keep doing keep your mouth shut if you want your paycheck." I felt the knot in my gut tighten. This wasn't just a bad tenant situation. This was organized. My knee ached every time I limped across the lot, but I pushed myself to jot down license plates, times, and faces. I was too old to play hero, but I couldn't turn a blind eye. The warning came on a Thursday night. I was writing in my journal when I heard the knock. It was soft, almost polite. When I opened the door, no one was there, but under the mat was a folded piece of paper. 3 words, "Stay out of it." My heart thudded in my chest. Someone had spotted me. I closed the door, locked it, and sat with my back against the bed. I hadn't felt that old edge of fear in years, the kind that comes when you know you're not just a witness, you're a target. I thought about calling Caroline, but what would I tell her? That her old man was sticking his nose into trouble he had no business in? Instead, I picked up the phone and dialed an old colleague in Houston PD. His name was Frank, and we'd shared more stakeouts than I could count. When he answered, I whispered like the walls could hear me. "Frank, I think I've stumbled into something at this motel." "You sure you're not just restless after surgery?" he asked. I told him what I'd seen, the van, the girl, the cash, the crying. Then I sent him some of the photos I'd snapped. The line went quiet for a moment. "Mike," he said finally, "stay put, don't push it. You don't have a badge anymore." "I know," I said, "but somebody needs to pay attention." That night, I slept with my old pocket knife under the pillow just in case. 2 nights later, everything came to a head. Around midnight, I woke to shouting. At first it was muffled, then louder. Angry male voices, a crash, and a girl's scream. My instincts fired up like a siren. I grabbed the phone and called Frank again. "It's happening now," I hissed. Minutes later, red and blue lights flashed across the cracked blinds of my room. Tactical officers in black gear swarmed the property, shouting commands, boots thundering against the walkways. I sat frozen by the window, heart pounding as they kicked in the door to 237. One by one, men were dragged out in cuffs. I saw 2 teenage girls wrapped in blankets, crying as officers led them to safety. Rosa stood near the laundry room, shaking and sobbing as a female officer tried to calm her down. And then Pete, smug, grinning Pete, was shoved into the back of a squad car, his fake friendliness gone. I watched it unfold like a scene from my old life, except this time I wasn't the one barking orders. I was just an old man in a motel room with a bad knee, bearing witness. The next morning, Caroline showed up in tears. She begged me to come stay with her family. "Dad, you can't keep doing this to yourself," she said, hugging me tight. I promised her I'd think about it, but inside I knew the truth. Even in retirement, even broken down, the job had found me. I couldn't ignore it any more than I could ignore my own heartbeat. Later, when the lot had emptied and the flashing lights were gone, I sat at the small table and opened my journal. On the last page, with shaky hands, I wrote, "Sometimes retirement doesn't mean the danger retires with you. Sometimes it follows you into the quiet places." I closed the book, feeling the ache in my knee and the heavier ache in my chest. I hadn't saved the world, but I had done something. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The world doesn't stop needing good people just because we grow old or tired. Sometimes the duty to do what's right follows us into the quiet corners of our lives. We may not have the strength we once did, but courage doesn't retire and silence never protects the innocent. My name is Lauren Hayes, and in the autumn of 1994 I was 25 years old, broke, and trying to pretend my life wasn't falling apart. I had just left behind a man I thought I was going to marry, someone I had wasted nearly 3 years on, only to find out he had someone else the whole time. After the breakup, I tried to throw myself into work at the diner, but the same faces came through every day, and each night I went home to the same small apartment that smelled faintly of my upstairs neighbor's cigarettes. I felt stuck, restless, like I couldn't breathe. When my cousin Megan suggested a road trip, I jumped at it. She was 5 years younger, studying photography at community college, and she had this hunger for chasing the forgotten parts of America: abandoned gas stations, faded billboards, towns bypassed by the interstate. She wanted pictures for her portfolio. I wanted to feel like I was going somewhere again. We set off in my old Ford Taurus, the AC barely working, and drove through Arizona's endless desert. The land stretched so flat and wide it felt like the sky was swallowing us. We listened to tapes, Tom Petty, Alanis Morissette, whatever I had left in the glove box, and stopped at greasy diners along the way. Megan leaned out the window with her camera every chance she got, snapping photos of empty motels and broken signs. By the time we reached Winslow, the sun was gone, the air thick with dry heat and my eyelids heavy. We had been driving for 12 hours, and all I wanted was a cheap bed and 4 walls. That's when we saw the flickering neon. Sunset Vista Motel. Vacancies available. "Looks cheap," Megan muttered as I pulled in. "That's the point," I said, even though the place gave me a knot in my stomach. The lot was half lit, weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt, and a black pickup sat idle under a busted street lamp. The lobby was worse. A scratched plexiglass shield separated us from the clerk, a bald man with wet-looking eyes. The walls were yellowed from smoke, and a dusty cuckoo clock ticked too loudly above his head. "Cash only," he said before I could ask. "Don't you take cards?" "Machine's broken. Cash or no room." Every instinct told me to walk away, but exhaustion made me weak. I pulled out 2 20s, and he slid the key for room 14 through the gap in the glass. His eyes never left mine until I turned away. The room smelled of mildew. The carpet was burned through in spots, the curtains dotted with cigarette holes, and the bathroom sink leaked onto the cracked tile. A crooked painting of a desert sunset hung above the bed. I checked the locks out of habit. The chain was broken. "Perfect," I muttered. Megan laughed, snapping a photo of it. "At least it's authentic." But I didn't feel like laughing. Something about that place felt off, like it was watching us the way the clerk had, and I told myself it was just one night. Just one night. The thin walls made it impossible to sleep. I lay awake listening to every sound, the squeak of footsteps pacing above us, the faint cry of a baby down the hall, a thud that rattled the headboard as if furniture had been dragged. Megan had fallen asleep with her headphones on, the light from her Discman flickering blue across the sheets. I envied her calm. At 11:30, the doorknob jiggled, a metallic rattle, quick, deliberate. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Megan's eyes flew open. "Did you hear?" "Don't move," I whispered. The knob rattled again, then went still. We held our breaths, listening. After a minute, the silence returned, but it was the heavy kind that makes your ears ring. "Probably just someone drunk looking for the wrong room," Megan whispered. She tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been a mistake. Around midnight, Megan got restless. "I'm starving. I saw a vending machine in the lobby." "Are you serious?" I hissed. "After what just happened?" She grinned in the dark, always braver than me. "I'll be 2 minutes." I stood by the window while she left, chewing my thumbnail raw. That's when I noticed the black pickup truck. It circled the lot once, twice before stopping under the same broken lamp. 2 men sat inside, their faces shadowed, their eyes turned toward the second-floor rooms. When Megan returned, she was pale. The clerk was on the phone. He stopped when I walked in. He just looked at me, like he knew something. My stomach twisted. At 1:15, the knocking started. Soft at first, then a voice. "Room service. Complimentary drinks." We hadn't ordered anything. We both knew it. I shook my head at Megan. "Don't answer." The knocking grew louder, sharper, until the door shook in its frame. Then suddenly, silence. The payphone outside our door rang. The sound cut through the corridor like a scream. I felt sweat break across my forehead. Megan's hands trembled around her camera as if it could protect us. "We have to do something," she whispered. "What? Open the door?" Her lips pressed tight. I dragged the dresser across the carpet, shoving it against the door. My arms ached, but adrenaline made me stronger than I thought I was. We sat on the bed, backs pressed to the headboard, whispering what we'd do if someone forced their way in. "Throw the lamp at them," Megan said. "I'll grab the chair," I answered. We laughed, but it was hollow, desperate. The kind of laugh you give when you know you're in real danger. We stayed that way until dawn, the hours dragging like years. At 6 in the morning, the wail of sirens jolted us upright. I rushed to the window and saw police cruisers flooding the lot, red and blue lights bouncing off the cracked asphalt. Officers poured out, guns drawn, swarming the black pickup. 2 men were yanked from the cab, shoved face first against the hood, handcuffed. My chest heaved, but relief was fleeting. Moments later, the clerk was led out of the lobby, his hands bound behind his back. His wet eyes darted up at our room as if he knew exactly where we were watching. "Jesus Christ," Megan whispered. We packed in silence. I didn't even care about the leaky faucet or the crooked painting anymore. I just wanted out. We checked out with a young officer at the desk who told us everything. The motel had been under surveillance for months. The clerk had been working with traffickers, luring in travelers, stalling them until the pickup arrived. "You were lucky," the officer said, handing back my ID. "Might have gone differently. If you'd opened that door, things..." My hands shook as I tucked it into my wallet. Megan stared at the floor, her camera strap wrapped tight around her wrist. Back in the car, we sat for a long time before I finally turned the key. The Taurus rattled to life, and we rolled out of the lot without a word. Megan raised her camera, looked at the photos of the motel on her film, and quietly pressed the delete button on her memory. "Some places aren't meant to be remembered," she said. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We drove east into the rising sun, the desert stretching endless ahead of us, and I swore to myself I'd never stay in a roadside motel again. That night taught me that danger often wears an ordinary face. A neon sign, a cheap room, a clerk with a flat voice. All of it seemed so normal until it wasn't. My mistake was ignoring the knot in my gut, dismissing it as paranoia. What saved us wasn't bravery, but hesitation. The choice not to open a door when every instinct screamed something was wrong. Trust your instincts even when logic tells you you're being silly. Fear exists for a reason. It doesn't always mean run, but it does mean pay attention. That night in Winslow proved that a locked door, a moment's caution, can be the difference between surviving to tell the story or becoming one more name lost in the dark. My name is Mark Reynolds, and in November of 2018 I was 32 years old, sitting in a life that felt like it had collapsed without warning. A year earlier, my marriage had ended in a mess of arguments and court papers. My ex-wife had moved to Seattle, taking our daughter with her, and though I tried to be there for visitation, the 4-hour drive always felt like a reminder of the distance that had grown between us. Work was unfulfilling. Just spreadsheets and endless conference calls, and nights were worse. Quiet motel rooms, the glow of a TV, and a silence that pressed in too tight. That November, my cousins invited me to Salem for an early holiday gathering. I wanted to go, partly to feel normal again, partly to remind myself I still had family that cared. Dinner stretched long into the night, full of laughter I hadn't heard in too long. But when the question came, "You staying over?" I shook my head. I didn't want to crowd their house, didn't want to intrude. Truthfully, I also didn't want to lie awake on their couch, listening to my cousin and his wife whisper after the kids went to bed. So I found the cheapest place nearby, a rundown little spot called the Driftwood Motel. It was the kind of place you see from the highway, half-lit neon buzzing in the dark, promising vacancy like it was a gift. The online listing had only one blurry photo, but the price was low, and I told myself, "One night, Mark. You can survive one night." When I checked in, it was late, close to 11. The clerk, a man in his late 40s with thinning hair and a cheerful tone that felt just a little forced, greeted me like I was the first guest of the year. "Evening, you're our last guest tonight. Room 6, quiet corner." His eyes lingered too long, though, the kind of stare that makes you aware of your own posture. I smiled politely, took the key, and went on my way. The room smelled stale, cigarettes buried under something damp I couldn't quite name. The carpet was thin enough to see patches of floor beneath, and the lamp flickered before settling on a weak glow. I muttered, "Just one night. Get through one night." I lay on the bed, scrolling my phone until my eyes blurred, but just as I started drifting off, a sound jolted me awake. A sharp creak from the far wall, then a dull thump like a cabinet door closing. "Hello?" I whispered into the dark, immediately embarrassed. Silence answered back. I told myself it was plumbing, maybe the wind, but something didn't add up. The clerk had said I was the last guest that night, so who was in the room next door? The following evening, after another long dinner with family, I pulled back into the motel lot around 7:30. The front office was dark, though the neon open sign buzzed faintly. Nobody at the desk. I shrugged it off, figured maybe the guy had gone home early, and walked back to room 6. The moment I slid my key in, I noticed the door wasn't latched. It gave way too easily. Inside, my bag sat on the chair where I'd left it, but the zipper was half open. The TV remote was on the bed. I never put it there. My stomach sank. No, I whispered. No, no. It was subtle, but someone had been inside. I dialed the office number on the plastic card by the phone. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. I told myself housekeeping had slipped in, but there'd been no knock, no sign. And what kind of motel cleaned at night? My chest tightened with unease. That night I lay awake, phone clutched in my hand like a weapon. Around midnight the noises started again. First footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing above or maybe below. Then a dragging sound, something heavy sliding across a surface. Finally a sound that made my blood run cold. Breathing, not the pipes, not the wind. Breathing, human, steady, just beyond the wall. I sat up, scanning the room. My eyes landed on the old couch pressed awkwardly against the far wall. Something about it felt off. It was angled just enough to hide the seam of the wall behind it. Against every instinct, I got up and shoved it aside. There, almost flush with the wall, was a small wooden hatch. Its edges had been painted the same dull beige as the rest of the room, like someone had tried to hide it. My pulse thundered as I knelt in front of the hatch. There was a handle, small and scratched from use. I tugged at it. Locked. Relief washed over me for half a second, until I realized the lock wasn't a padlock or latch. It was a simple bolt, on the inside. I froze. Oh God, I muttered. Whoever had locked it was on the other side. Then came the sound, a slow metallic scrape as the bolt shifted. My knees went weak. The hatch creaked open an inch, then two, revealing a staircase descending into pitch darkness. A cold draft rose from below, carrying the smell of damp concrete, rust, and something sour, almost metallic. I stumbled back, whispering, "Not real. This isn't real." Then it came, breathing, louder now, echoing up the staircase. Heavy, deliberate, waiting. Every instinct screamed to run. I slammed the hatch shut, shoving the couch back in place with every ounce of strength I had. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped my car keys as I snatched them off the dresser. I didn't even grab my bag. Bursting out into the night, I sprinted across the gravel lot. My breath clouded in the cold air, heart hammering so hard it hurt. I dove into my car, jammed the key into the ignition, and tore out of the lot. In my rearview mirror, just before the motel disappeared behind me, I saw him. The clerk, standing outside room 6, watching me go. A faint smile stretched across his face like he'd been waiting for me to run. I didn't stop until I hit a 24-hour gas station nearly 30 miles away. I parked under the harsh fluorescent lights, locked the doors twice, and sat shaking in the driver's seat. My cousin picked up on the second ring. "Mark, everything okay? I can't stay there. I'm coming over. Where are you?" "On my way," I said. I didn't explain. How could I? I wasn't sure I understood myself. When I finally pulled into their driveway, my cousin opened the door in his pajamas. He took one look at me and frowned. "You look like hell." I wanted to tell him about the hatch, the breathing, the smile on the clerk's face, but the words lodged in my throat. Saying it out loud made it sound impossible. Instead, I muttered, "That motel's not right." He didn't press. He just nodded, made up the couch for me, and left me with a blanket. The next morning, with a clearer head, I tried to look it up. Driftwood Motel, Salem. Nothing. Not a listing, not a photo, not even an old review. It was like it had been erased overnight. For weeks after, I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, lack of sleep, the holiday nerves. But deep down, I knew better. I hadn't imagined the sound of the bolt sliding open. I hadn't imagined the cold air, the smell of rust and damp. I hadn't imagined the clerk standing outside with that faint knowing smile. Sometimes I dream of the hatch. I dream it opens fully, and something climbs the steps toward me, something that was waiting all along. I always wake up before it reaches me. I never went back to Driftwood. I don't know if it still stands, if it ever truly did. But I know what I felt in that room, and it wasn't a dream. Someone was down there, watching, waiting. That night taught me something I'll never forget. Trust your instincts. When a place feels wrong, when every part of you screams to get out, listen. Logic will tell you to ignore it, to rationalize. But instincts exist for a reason. They've been honed over centuries to keep us alive. I also learned that not every door is meant to be opened. Some darkness isn't curiosity, some silence isn't peace, and sometimes survival means walking away even if you never get answers. Because some answers you don't want.